Hey, Pastoral Ministry students. I'm going to share some thoughts on taking care of yourself as a ministry leader. And the topic of this short teaching is pastoral self-care and renewal. It's one of the most important areas of life for a ministry leader, and yet it is often one of the most neglected parts of the rhythms of a ministry leader. And part of my story, one of the things that comes out of my ministry story thus far, has to do with both a lack of self care and what happened when a series of crises in my life collided with that lack of self care and the resulting burnout and experience of depression that I went through. And I wanted to share with you just a minute or two on that. And then I wanted to give some principles about protecting yourself and being proactive to help prevent burnout and these kinds of things that can come into the life of a leader. The truth is that ministry leadership puts people in a more vulnerable position than many other fields of work and career do. Puts people in a more vulnerable position emotionally, also professionally, some of the dynamics of ministry, certainly so. But personally, in the area of emotions and energy, and what can happen to us when we're running low, ministry has a way of draining us because of the investment we make in people, and then sometimes the intersection that happens with crises in our lives, whether the crisis is directly related to the ministry, the church perhaps, or a situation with people in the church, or a truly personal crisis in someone's life. Eventually, all of us in life are bound to come into times of crisis. And it's important that we have structures in place that help us not only prevent unnecessary compounding crises because of burnout and things like that, but also how to properly respond to personal crisis and some things we should do. So I want to share some thoughts on that. And in my life story, we had been going along a number of years in ministry and had come into a really great season, really one of the best seasons in our pastoral years at the church in Southern Maryland. As far as the growth of the church, how rapidly it was growing, and programs were growing, and people were coming into the church, God was touching people and doing great things. And we were excited, and I was very busy. And I was also young. I was in my early 30s. I had a lot of energy reserves and a lot of youthfulness in me that I could depend on, even though I would barely take a day off during the week, just barely a day. And I didn't take personal days. I didn't take days to go away on retreat, as pastors are usually counseled to do when you look into these things. I didn't do any of those things. I just kind of chugged along and worked really hard, prayed hard, and we believed God together. And then I came into a series of personal crises in my life. And I can't tell the full story of each of those, but they came one after another. And as I was in therapy at one point shortly after this, the therapist said to me, any one of the things that you have been through recently are enough to give a person depression and anxiety and a need for therapy. And I had a successive series of major life crises, unavoidable things, not things that had to do with decisions I made or anything like that. But they began with the death of my father. I was just 31 years old, and he died of cancer, and he really suffered a horrible death. And he loved the Lord, and he was a believer in the Lord, and was strong in faith right to the end. But it was an extremely painful experience as a young man who really had just come of age in such a way that I could relate to my father as a friend and not just son or a peer, I guess you could say. And he suffered very miserably in the pain. And while we were relieved for him when he was gone, that he would be relieved of that pain and be with the Lord, the pain and the heartache of the grief and walking with my mother through that grief and the rest of my family really just put me on E. And I remember returning from those days in that first year of grief and how challenging pastoring was because of how emotionally drained I was. I read about grieving. I got some books about grieving the loss of your parents and sought some counsel, went to therapy. But that first year or year and a half, I was just emotionally on E on a regular basis. And it helped to know that that was normal when a person was grieving. But just about as soon as I was starting to come out of that heaviest period of that first year and a half of grieving the loss of my father, I had a very strange situation happen in our home where we had an invasion. I'm just going to give you the short version. You're going to be very curious about this. We had an invasion of a blood-sucking parasite come into our home. You heard me right on that. We had some bats, the eastern brown bat, I believe it is called. It wasn't the bats that were blood-sucking parasites, and I thank God for that. Bats got into the eaves of the dormers of our house, and I thought that was fine. They weren't in the attic. I checked the attic. They weren't able. There was no way they could actually get inside the structure of the home, but they were just in the overhanging eaves and had set up a little nest there. And I thought, well, they'll eat all the mosquitoes and eat most of the bugs in our yard, and we won't have as many bugs. But little did I know that there is a parasite that lives with bats, and it is basically the twin. It's really a cousin, but they look the exact same. They function the exact same, except for the coloration is slightly different in their exoskeleton. The same as the international infamous bed bug. They prefer bats, and if they fall out of a bat nest, they will take the next best thing. And you know how this story went. They fell out of the bat nest, found their way into our home, and began to infest our home. And we started getting, especially me, some very nasty welts during the night that would burn and itch for days on end. And when I learned what was going on, I had read some horror stories of families that had tried to battle this infestation in their home and they were unable to overcome it and literally abandoned their homes and counted their losses. And I was horrified. And I gave it everything I had. And the problem is that I knew that these parasites, these bugs, would bite at night. And so I would lay down and try to go to sleep, and I would lay in bed, and as I would fall asleep, I would be thinking, as soon as I get to sleep, these bugs are going to come into this room and they're going to bite me, and then I'm going to have burning and itching welts for days on end. And I started developing a sleep anxiety, and it was just everything you can think that would go with a sleep anxiety, and I'm sure you're thinking it's very understandable. But I developed I didn't know until later, a sleep panic disorder related to this bug situation where I would wake up in the night in sweats, heart racing and pounding, and I couldn't sleep for hours, and I would go days with barely any sleep and had never experienced anything like that in my entire life. I was already on E after a long period of grief, and this situation really brought me to the end of myself. And it's hard to express that in a really short version for time's sake in this video. But I was coming to the end of myself and I was lacking sleep all the time. I was exhausted. I was not able to find the energies required for giving my whole heart to people. Pretty much the only thing I could hold on to was the excitement and the fun of weekend ministry and Sunday ministry. And a combination of the anointing of the Holy Spirit and the adrenaline that comes with the setting of weekend church ministry and being the leader of a church, I would push in through to the weekend and have fun on the weekends and then be miserable all week long. So we decided to take some time off and we went away for a few weeks. And then we returned while we were away, while we were gone, trying to get a break from what was happening and the condition I was in. While we were on vacation, I came down with an extremely rare bloodstream infection. It was a form of sepsis, and I ended up in the hospital, my life on the line for a short period of time there, and worried about my wife and kids. I was in the shape of my life. I was in excellent health. In my early 30s, I had been exercising regularly, and I can't tell the whole story, but it ended up being a very rare situation that the doctors were puzzled by, but eventually found out because of the presence of the bacteria. And I ended up on weeks and weeks of medical leave to recover from this severe infection. I returned to the church so exhausted and so wiped out from what was going on. And at that point where we were in the church, we were and I was on E in every way. And I know you're reading this week is about running on E. And I was on E in every way possible, the lowest I had ever been personally in my life. And right at that point, we began leading our church through a total overhaul, a complete relaunching and replanting of the church. And we believe it's what God had brought us to that church for. And during that season of relaunching our church, there were many exciting things, and it was exciting and exhausting, probably in good ways usually. Again, I was kind of just barely making it through the week, and then I would really amp up for the weekend and then crash all week long, not recover like I normally would by Tuesday, something like that. And there was, understandably, in a season of change like that, there were a number of people in the church who did not believe in what was happening and were not in support of that, and actively began to seek to undo what I was doing. And we believed God had called us to it, and we were giving everything we had, and we loved every one of those people through it. And still to this day, I feel affection in my heart towards them, and God's done a work in me. And one of those people I still consider a tremendous man of God and friend. But we had a tough season, and as that group of people departed, not all of them, but some of them did some very painful things and said some very, very painful and hurtful things. And you've done a pastoral interview now in this course as one of your assignments, and I would expect that you've heard a little bit about the experiences of what leaders go through, and that is certainly the case with church leaders. And already being on at such a low place in my life, their words in that hurtful season, and simply so much of it was just the intensity of that season, the intensity of the overhaul and the driving energies that were required, and also the excitement. All of a sudden, I crashed. I experienced a personal crash like I have never experienced before. And it wasn't something that just goes away after a couple of days of a good rest or a couple nights sleep or something like that. I hit a low point with unexplained anxiety and depression, and I was so drained emotionally, and I was in such a bad place. And with Emily's encouragement, and that's an understatement, there's a whole story to that. And I thank God for my wife, because if it wasn't for her, I don't know if I would have gone for the help that I needed. And I began to seek therapy and help. And I was at such a low point for so long after all of those things. I took my doctor's and my therapist's recommendation, and I went on medication for a while, and it helped me tremendously. And it was so humbling. And I thank God for all the counsel that I received. And as hard as it was sometimes to say, I thank God for that experience, because I learned a lot about my limitations. I learned a lot about my need for other people around me, wise people, people who love me and care for me and can see through things that I am too invested in and too emotionally mixed up about at times to think clearly on. And when we come to those kinds of moments in our lives, we need those trusted, godly people who love us enough to tell us we need to do something different. We need to stop. We need to change something. We need to get help, and whatever it may be. And I had a number of those people that I had brought around my life, and I thank God for that. And I learned a lesson about limitations and the weakness of our flesh and the weakness of our humanity. And out of that, now more than ever in my life, I've come to believe in the importance of being proactive in caring for yourself as a leader. Because as Benjamin Franklin's old saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. And what I want to do is I want to give you some principles about protecting yourself through time off. And you may not feel challenged about this now. Those of you that have children, you probably do feel challenged automatically in some ways. by having any time to rest and relax. But in the busyness of ministry, as you take on ministry responsibilities, and especially as you become a leader in ministry, and especially all the more for lead pastors and senior pastors of the local church, you need to be proactive in protecting your time off. And what I want to give you is a set of ideas here. That's it, for lack of a better word. A set of practices, that's a better word, for weekly, daily, monthly, and annual rhythms of rest. Every week, a pastor needs at least a full day off the phone, off the computer. Those are big challenges today. Away from the church building, away from the needs of the people in the church, a day to disconnect and be with family, be to yourself, and let yourself unwind. And a pastor usually needs to let this be known to the board. A board may not be aware, or people in the church may not be aware, and the church needs to know that the pastor takes a certain day off. And I can't say it enough, the importance in your day off of staying away from electronic devices that connect you to people and needs, phones, computer, email. The more you put those away from yourself and hit the off button, the better you will be in that time. In addition to a day off, a ministry leader needs a weekly block of silence and solitude. And this is in addition to a day off. And I think preferably not during the day off, although it's fine to do it again during the day off, but as another window in your weekly rhythm, a block of time, perhaps a couple hours, or perhaps an afternoon or a morning, where you can get away, go for a walk, go for a drive, just let yourself think. And in a very gentle, grace-filled way, responding to the grace of God, not feeling that you have to be in intense fasting and prayer the whole time, but letting yourself naturally lift up thoughts and prayers to God as you spend time in silence and solitude. Every week a pastor needs a day off. Every week a pastor needs a block of time for silence and solitude. Every week a pastor needs to have moments where they prioritize family, blocks in the calendar, blocks of time where family is your focus. 2 or 3 evenings where you are devoted to the needs of your family and spending time with your family, even if it's working together, doing something work related around the house, or helping others, or watching a favorite show, or just having a great meal, going for a walk, whatever it might be. Weekly rhythms. Also, daily rhythms in the day to day. As you come into as you come into the early years of middle age, some of you are there, some of you are, even in our small class, are into middle age now. Middle age begins in your mid-30s. And I remember when I first learned that, I was so offended by that because I thought middle age was you have to be 55 to be middle age. And I found out that your mid-30s is when you mark the beginning of middle age. And as you come into your 30s, mark my words, you will notice that you do not have the same energies and the same resiliency that you had when you were in your 20s, and certainly not in your teens. What am I saying about this? If you stay up late at night, if you skip a night's sleep because you wanted to do something, or you wanted to stay out with your friends until 2 a.m. or even midnight, something like that, just have fun and not anything troublesome, but just having a good time and enjoying yourself, it will catch up with you. Every once in a while, those things are fine, but as a rhythm, every day, a leader needs to guard their rest. And I want to give you what I call a secret of the successful. Every hour of sleep before midnight is worth 2 after. I want you to think about that for a minute. The way your body clock works and your rhythms, your physical rhythms, this has proven true for so many people. Every hour of sleep before midnight is worth to after. And I wish we were together so we could kind of discuss that and talk about what that means. But I found it to be true. You need margin every day. Don't pack your calendar out, your ministry calendar and then your personal calendar, so jammed with activity that you don't stop moving or thinking until you hit the pillow at night. Margin is one of the keys to a healthy leader's life. And I'm not just talking mentally and emotionally, I'm talking physically because of the taxation on your body systems and the pull on your adrenaline and cortisol, the stress hormone. If you don't give yourself, if you don't have habits of having some margin where you're just kind of, you have time in between things, you're not always rushing, you are purposely putting margin into your calendar and separating activities with at least small amounts of margin at some points during the day. It's hard on, studies have shown on the human heart, on the physical heart in your body. The stress takes a toll on a person and begins to wear the heart down prematurely. And I've read just a tremendous book on that from a doctor who's an expert in these things. And so margin, he talks about the importance of margin. And margin is something that by default, most Westerners do not have. We pride ourselves in busyness. We expect to be busy. We expect others to be busy all the time, and it takes intentionality. So we've got weekly rhythms. We've got daily rhythms. For a pastor, the recommendations that I have heard is that a pastor allow up to 3 evenings a week involved in the church and in ministry and in meetings and so on. Things like elder meetings with the elder board, small group meetings, visitation, and having people over and so on. On average, about 3 evenings a week at the most. Anything more than that, and it's going to drain you, it's going to drain your family. You're going to be spending so much time away from your family. And that's assuming, of course, that the daytimes, most of the daytimes have a lot of work and ministry in them. But 3 evenings a week, that is a busy schedule for a pastor. And the reality is that pastors will often do more than that, and it's to their detriment. So daily margins are important. It's important to take care of yourself every day, to be thinking about diet and exercise. And I could talk a long time about that. It's made a huge difference in my life. And I don't want to go on and on with that because this is a shorter teaching. And something I have found that I recommend to leaders and pastors is that every night, we're still in daily rhythms, every night you allow yourself at least 30 minutes of wind down time before you go to bed, so that you shut things down. You're not having big conversations anymore. You're not looking at things on the screen on your computer or phone. You're not looking at paperwork. You're not looking at bank accounts. You're not working out a difficult conversation at home. And of course, sometimes you can't avoid it. But as a habit, you are implementing a 30-minute window to just kind of chill and sit and maybe go see one of your kids or other family members and say, how are you doing? How was your day today? And just take it easy to help yourself unwind before bed. Okay, monthly rhythms. In addition to the weekly block of silence and solitude, people who work with pastors a lot say pastors need to take at least 1 day a month for silence and solitude, a full day where they can be away from their regular duties, go somewhere else, do something different, be alone, be away from connections with people, and take time for yourself. Also, every month, the recommendations that I think are so good is that a pastor has at least one quality date with your spouse, at least one a month, where you go out, most likely spend a good chunk of money, more than you might spend on a weekly basis, on like a weekly getaway or something, but at least one quality date for a married pastor to really connect and just buy a nice meal, purchase a nice meal, go do something that the two of you enjoy, and be willing to invest both time and money in a significant way to enjoy each other. And again, there are times and seasons financially when that's not possible. There are seasons when it's hard to do it in a month. But if you're intentional about it, you save for it and you plan for it, you're going to be able to find the block of time. And often you will be able to find some finances. You don't have to go to a 4-star restaurant and rent a limousine. That's fine, but that's not what I'm saying. Just something that you're really investing yourself in as a couple. Okay, lastly, for these rhythms, and then I'm just going to have a closing thought about dealing with crisis. You should think about annual rhythms. You should plan ahead for your family vacation. Otherwise, other people in the ministry will make plans for you and will take over that time and make it very difficult to get away. Pastors and missionaries also often find that spontaneous things are often the easiest way to suddenly realize we have a day and a half here when we can take some time. We have 3 days next week. I have some time. And those are great. But it's important that you take time to plan an annual vacation, a getaway that allows for some of the, here's what makes vacations great, because not all vacations are renewing. And once you've been in a family for a while, you will probably have had the experience where you come back from a vacation far more exhausted and frazzled than you were when you went on vacation. Nobody wants that. That's not how it's supposed to turn out. But when you plan for a vacation, plan for plenty of downtime, rest, taking it easy, time together as a family and sharing preference, doing things that different family members enjoy, and looking for activities that everyone enjoys that you believe you'll have a great time in. Put most of your money in those things that you believe everyone will enjoy together, whether it's the beach or it's some fun tourist related activity or renting four-wheelers and going on a trail, whatever it might be, a ski trip, things that you believe your family will really enjoy once a year for a big getaway, in addition to the other little ones. On the holidays, my recommendation for pastors is to invest in your larger family. Rather than trying to get away on your own as a family for this wonderful vacation to yourselves, I recommend that you invest in your larger family. You change it up and share, especially Thanksgiving and Christmas. You share with your family and also your spouse's family, investing in them and going to them or having them come to you and hosting and blessing and loving on them, spending time together, eating meals together, the things we love to do during the holidays, and take turns so that both of your families, husband and wife, are getting some time and attention from you and your family. That's just turned out really great in our lives, and we really enjoy doing that. We like to stay home for Christmas now, and so we visit with my family that's more local. Not everybody has that opportunity with local family. And then at Thanksgiving, this is how it's worked for us. We go and visit my wife's family. All right, a couple more annual rhythm things. An annual spiritual retreat that you can go away on as a pastor and spouse, and possibly even as a family, although that's really the next one. A spiritual retreat where you go to a conference, you go to a place where you can focus on prayer and you will have plenty of quiet time to read and to pray and reflect and rest in the environment of a spiritual retreat. And another idea that someone recommended to me in our church in Maryland when I was pastoring, because he did this with his family, he was an elder in the church, and I thought it was such a great idea, is what he called spiritual vacations. Ask the board for 3 to 5 days additional off time during the year to take a spiritual vacation, where you take your whole family to a faith conference of some kind, to a spiritual conference or ministry conference where there are activities for young people and services for the whole family and inspiring worship and great word and especially great personal ministry opportunities to receive ministry and the laying on of hands. Go to those kinds of spiritual vacations with your family once a year. You won't be sorry. After I heard that recommendation, We, during those years, we started taking our kids with us to our annual ministers conference in the summer. We ended up one time in Lake Junaluska, North Carolina, and we just had an absolute blast together as a family. All right, one last thing before I finish. It's inevitable that crisis will come into our lives in different ways at different points. And when we're in ministry, crisis is all the more difficult to deal with because of the emotional investment required in the ministry and the kinds of interpersonal energies that ministry requires. And what I want to emphasize to you is to never go it alone. If you hit a crisis, whether it's a crisis surrounding a loss in your life, if it's a crisis that has come directly as the result of the ministry that you lead, if it's a health crisis that has come to you where your health is not the same and suddenly there's been a diagnosis or something has happened to you, I want to urge you to not deal with this alone, to have a good doctor, to have a good therapist, and to set these things up beforehand so that if and when a time of crisis comes, you have a network of professionals who know how to respond to those things. If it is an inward crisis of emotion and thought, burnout or depression or anxiety, which again, ministry leaders are more vulnerable to those things. You have a Christian therapist that you have, and hopefully you see every so often for checkups that you can call and you can go in and see and you can begin to receive some help and therapy. If it's a physical crisis, you should have a doctor that you're regularly seeing. And as strange as it may sound, adults often will not have a doctor that knows about their physical issues and knows their health history. And as a leader, take care of yourself, take care of your temple so that you can stay around as long as possible to serve the Lord and share his kingdom and advance his kingdom in the world. And so these things are bound to happen in some way or some form in our lives, crisis. And we want to have people around us and not think that we can just navigate that through our morning devotion time. And I can tell you that from experience. Morning devotion times is not the way to work through a crisis. You will work through crises in your devotions, but you need the help of people who know how to deal with those situations. All right. Don't be isolated. Be proactive and look for care that is confidential, professional, and confidential care, which relieves some of the pressures and worries of it being too public. If it's confidential, it won't be. Okay, well, I hope you have a great rest of your week and look forward to connecting with you in our last week of the course. God bless you.